All right, let's jump right in. We're about to unpack one of the most intense stories in the entire book of Exodus. It's got everything you could ask for in a high stakes drama: a leader who seemingly vanishes, a whole nation of people lost in fear, a golden idol, and a sacred covenant with God literally shattered at the foot of a mountain. This is a story all about faith, about failure, and what it truly means to lead. This question really gets to the core of what's about to unfold. I want you to just imagine this for a second. You've been rescued from slavery by this one incredible figure. He's your guide, your protector, your direct line to the divine. And then he's just gone. For 40 days and 40 nights, nothing. Just silence. What do you do? How long can you hold on before that fear starts to curdle into total desperation? So that's where our story kicks off, down at the base of Mount Sinai. You can just feel the tension in the air. The people are getting restless. That awesome sight of smoke and thunder up on the mountain peak, it used to be a sign of God's power. Now it just feels like a wall, cutting them off from Moses, the only leader they've ever known. This quote right here, it says it all. You can find it in Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, and it perfectly captures the crisis. This isn't just about them being impatient. It's way deeper than that. It's a profound anxiety. Their anchor, their connection to God, is gone. That old-timey phrase, "we wot not what has become of him," it's just their way of saying, look, we have absolutely no idea what happened to this guy. And in that exact same verse, Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, that simmering anxiety just boils over. It turns into a full-blown demand. They swarm around Aaron, who's Moses' brother, and they say, "Up, make us gods which shall go before us." See, without their visible leader, they are desperate for a visible God, something they can see and touch and put their faith in. And this is where things really take a turn. The people's fear gets mixed with some pretty weak leadership from Aaron, and it leads directly to this massive act of rebellion. Let's walk through exactly how this infamous idol was created. What's wild is just how quickly this all goes down. The book of Exodus chapter 32 lays it out step by step. It all starts in verse 2, where Aaron tells them, "Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, and of your daughters, and bring them unto me." So do they hesitate? Nope. Exodus chapter 32 verse 3 says they do it right away. Then, in Exodus chapter 32 verse 4, Aaron takes all that gold, melts it down, and makes a golden calf. And in that very same verse, the people see it and they shout, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." Just unbelievable. And get this, they're not even trying to hide it. This isn't some secret, shameful ceremony. It's a huge public party. We're told in Exodus chapter 32, verse 5, that Aaron builds an altar right in front of the calf and announces, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." Then, verse 6 shows us the people get up early, they bring offerings, and the whole camp just erupts into this massive festival of eating, drinking, and celebrating. Okay, so while that party is raging down in the valley, a totally different conversation is happening way up on the mountain. Things are getting incredibly tense between God and Moses. This lays out the two sides of this intense negotiation perfectly. On one hand, you have God's judgment, and it is swift and it is harsh. In Exodus chapter 32, starting at verse 7, God tells Moses, "Thy people have corrupted themselves." Then in Exodus chapter 32, verse 9, he calls them a stiff-necked people. And finally, in Exodus chapter 32, verse 10, he delivers the verdict, "Let me alone that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them." Wow. But then Moses steps in. He pleads in Exodus chapter 32, verse 11, "Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people?" He begs God in Exodus chapter 32, verse 12, to turn from thy fierce wrath. And then in Exodus chapter 32, verse 13, he plays his trump card, reminding God of the unbreakable promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And here's the crazy part. It works. This single line from Exodus chapter 32, verse 14, is a massive turning point. Moses' passionate plea was successful. He literally stood in the gap between God's wrath and his people, and God relented. The immediate danger is over. But, fixing the problem up in the heavens is one thing. Now Moses has to go down and face the mess on the ground. And he has to do it while carrying the physical proof of the very laws his people are busy breaking. The irony is just staggering. I want you to really picture what he's holding here. According to Exodus chapter 32, verses 15 and 16,
These tablets were one of a kind. They were written on both sides, and, it says, the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God graven upon the tables. These aren't just rocks with rules on them. They are the physical embodiment of the covenant.
And this is the moment everything explodes. Exodus chapter 32, verse 19, tells us that as soon as Moses gets close enough to see that golden calf and all the partying, his own anger just erupts. And in one of the most stunning acts in the entire Bible, he lifts those divine tablets over his head and hurls them to the ground, shattering them into pieces. The symbol is broken because the covenant itself has been broken. The aftermath is just wow. It's fast and it is brutal. Moses goes from white-hot fury straight into action. The book of Exodus, chapter 32, verse 20, says he takes the calf, burns it, grinds it into dust, mixes it with water, and makes the people drink it, a bitter, gritty taste of their sin. Then he confronts Aaron. That's a super tense exchange in Exodus chapter 32, verses 21 through 24. And finally, Moses stands at the camp gate and, as we see in Exodus chapter 32, verse 26, he yells, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." And the entire tribe of Levi rallies to his side.
3,000. That's a heavy number, and it represents the terrible cost of this rebellion. The consequences weren't just symbolic. Exodus chapter 32, verse 28 gives us the grim total. On Moses' command, the Levites went through the camp and put to death the main instigators of this rebellion. About 3,000 men fell that day.
So, the rebellion has been crushed, but the sin itself, that's still hanging over the entire nation. And this is where we see a totally different, but just as powerful side of Moses' leadership. He has to go back up that mountain and plead for his people all over again. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This has got to be one of the most selfless things a leader has ever said. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 32, after telling God how great the people's sin was, Moses begs for their forgiveness. But then he adds this jaw-dropping condition. If you won't forgive them, then erase me. Blot me out of thy book. He is literally offering up his own eternal soul for theirs. So how does God respond to this incredible offer? Well, he doesn't take it. Instead, as we read in Exodus chapter 32, verses 33 and 34, he establishes this core principle of individual accountability. He says, "Whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book." He agrees to keep leading them, but the lesson is powerful. Yes, there is mercy, but there are also always consequences. Forgiveness doesn't just wipe the slate clean. And that's what we're left with, right? In this one story, Moses does both of these things. He's the furious enforcer of the law who smashes the tablets and cleanses the camp, but he's also the passionate advocate who stands before God willing to sacrifice himself to save the very people he just condemned. So what does this ancient story tell us about leadership today? It's a paradox, a tension that, I think you'll agree, has never really gone away.